Ever find yourself getting a little carried away, like at a restaurant, maybe ordering that extra appetizer? Or that dessert that just looks too good to pass up, and then the bill comes.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah, it's a quick way to learn about budgeting the hard way. But turns out, that same principle, it applies to something on a much larger scale. Cloud costs. And that's what we're diving into today, FinOps, specifically forecasting in the world of FinOps.
Sounds like a pretty big topic.
It is. And to help us break it all down, we're looking at an excerpt from, you guessed it, the FinOps framework. It's all about how organizations can kind of predict and manage those cloud expenses that, let's be honest, can sometimes feel like they have a life of their own.
Well, you're spot on about those personal budgeting lessons. They really do translate to managing cloud costs for companies.
Yeah.
I mean, at its core, FinOps is about bringing together those different teams. Finance, tech, business folks, they got to sing from the same hymn sheet to manage those costs effectively. And a big part of that, forecasting.
Okay, so when we say forecasting, are we talking like gazing into crystal balls here? Is it even possible to accurately predict these things in such a fast-changing environment?
That's where things get really interesting. The FinOps framework actually makes a really important point right off the bat. Forecasting in this context, it's not about some perfect prediction of the future. It's about using information to make good decisions right now, not trying to become, 100% accurate.
So less about predicting the future, more about planning for it. Got it. But I gotta say, it still sounds kind of daunting. Where do organizations even begin with this whole forecasting thing?
It all starts with wrapping your head around two key ideas, estimating and forecasting. And it's subtle, but they're different. Estimating. Think of it like that initial guess you make when you glance at a menu. You've got a rough idea, but it's not set in stone. Forecasting, on the other hand, that's where you take those initial estimates and you turn them into something much more concrete, like deciding on a budget for your meal before you even order.
Ah, so it's like moving from that initial hunch to a solid plan, but one that's actually, like you said, backed by data, not just gut feeling.
Exactly. And just like any skill, there's a learning curve to this. You don't just wake up a forecasting guru. The FinOps framework, it actually uses this idea of a crawl, walk, run maturity model to show how companies get better at it over time. So at that crawl stage, it's all about keeping it simple. You use historical data, kind of like peeking at last month's cloud bill to get a rough sense of what next month might look like.
Makes sense. You got to start somewhere, right? So you use what you already know to get a basic understanding. But how do you go from crawling to walking and eventually running with this whole forecasting thing?
So as organizations mature in their FinOps journey, they start incorporating more than just that basic historical data. More sophisticated stuff gets added to the mix. Like imagine you're at the walking stage. Now you might start factoring in things like, hey, we're anticipating some big growth in users, or we've got this new project that's going to require more resources running. That's when you get even more advanced. You might incorporate optimization strategies to use your cloud resources more efficiently, or factor in upcoming business changes that'll impact your cloud usage.
So it sounds like the more experience a company gets under its belt, the more nuanced and, well, insightful those forecasts become.
Absolutely. Think of it like this. The more data you have and the better you understand those patterns in your spending, the more accurate your predictions, your forecasts become. You get better at anticipating what's coming down the pipeline.
Okay, I'm getting a much clearer picture now. But why go through all this trouble in the first place? Why is accurate forecasting so crucial? I mean, it can't just be about staying within some budget, right?
You're hitting on a really important point. This goes way beyond just keeping your spending in check. Accurate forecasting. It has a direct impact on the real-world decisions a company makes.
Give me an example.
Sure. Imagine you're a company trying to decide between, say, investing more in your own physical infrastructure on-premise stuff versus moving more of your operations to the cloud. Accurate forecasting, it arms you with the information to actually compare those two options. Weigh the costs and benefits so you can make the most strategic decision for your specific situation.
So it's like choosing between, I don't know, renovating your kitchen versus just eating out every night. Both have their costs and their benefits, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about those big picture decisions like where your infrastructure lives. Forecasting. It plays a critical role in smaller decisions too, like evaluating new features or products.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. You're saying you can use it to decide if something is even worth doing in the first place, right?
Right. Imagine you're about to launch this cool new feature for your product. Accurate forecasting can help you figure out how much extra cloud stuff you'll need to support it, and then whether the potential revenue from that feature justifies the cost. It's all about assessing whether a new product launch or a feature upgrade makes financial sense.
So we're talking about making informed decisions at all levels, from those big strategic moves down to the nitty-gritty tactical stuff.
Exactly. And we can't forget about something that's increasingly important to a lot of companies these days: sustainability. With more and more concern about our environmental impact, accurate forecasting, it can actually help organizations minimize their cloud usage, which in turn reduces their carbon footprint.
Whoa, I never thought about it like that. So we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet here. We're talking about making responsible choices for, like, the planet.
100%. It's all connected. And here's where things get really interesting when we talk about forecasting. Let's say you're an application owner. Basically, you're responsible for a specific application running in the cloud. When you commit to a forecast, it's not just about some numbers in a file anymore. It's about taking ownership, being accountable for how you're managing the resources for that application.
It's like signing a contract, but with your future self, promising to not go on a wild cloud spending spree.
Exactly. Now, we've talked a lot about the why of forecasting, but let's shift gears a bit and zoom in on the who. The FinOps framework, it outlines several key players who are involved in this whole forecasting process. Each one has their own unique role to play, their own responsibilities. And trust me, understanding this part, the who, it can really level up your forecasting game.
All right, bring on the cast of characters. Who are these forecasting heroes and what makes them tick?
Well, let's meet them after a quick break.
So we're about to pull back the curtain and meet the people behind the forecasts, the ones making it all happen.
Exactly. And remember, this is a team sport. FinOps, it's all about collaboration. So let's imagine for a second you're the product person for some software application. You live and breathe user engagement, new features, all that good stuff. Basically, your goal is to deliver something valuable to your users. So put yourself in those shoes for a minute. What kind of key performance indicators, those KPIs everyone's always talking about, what would really matter to you in that role?
Okay, if I'm the product person, I'm definitely going to be obsessed with how people are actually using what we've built, right? Like, how many users do we have? Are they actually using of the features we spent all that time developing? And most importantly, is any of this actually translating into revenue? Those are the numbers I need to see to know if we're on the right track or if we need to make some adjustments.
You're speaking my language. That user data you're talking about, it's like gold dust for forecasting. Because let's say your user base suddenly explodes way faster than you expected. You're going to need to adjust your cloud resources accordingly and your budget to keep up with that demand. It's all about staying ahead of the curve, being proactive.
It's like planning a party, right? Except instead of snacks and drinks, we're talking about terabytes and processing power. More guests show up, you need more resources to keep things running smoothly.
Love that analogy. But there's something else we got to talk about. Because even with the best planning in the world, sometimes things just don't go according to plan, right? What happens when a forecast misses the mark? Maybe there's a sudden surge in demand that nobody saw coming, or a new feature turns out to be way less cost-effective than you'd hoped. How do you navigate those choppy waters?
Well, you got to stay calm, right? And this is where those clear KPIs we talked about come in handy. They're like our compass, our guiding stars. They help us track our progress, spot those potential icebergs early on, and make course corrections as needed.
Exactly. And when those unexpected bumps in the road pop up, it's not about playing the blame game. It's about remembering that FinOps thrives on transparency, everyone being on the same page. So if a forecast is off, well, there are going to be different folks responsible for getting things back on track. Maybe the finance team needs to adjust budgets, the engineering team needs to work their magic to make things more efficient, or the product team needs to reevaluate priorities based on, you guessed it, cost. It's teamwork in action.
Okay, so it's about having each other's backs, working together to weather the storm. But how do you actually measure success when it comes to forecasting? Is the goal, like, to hit those numbers perfectly every single time?
That's what a lot of people think, but it's actually a misconception. See, the FinOps community, they define success in a different way. It's about managing that gap between your forecast and what you actually end up spending, keeping it within acceptable limits. So yeah, it's less about being some kind of fortune teller and more about informed flexibility, being able to adapt when things change.
So it's okay to not be spot on as long as you're in the right ballpark.
Exactly. The goal is to stay within a reasonable percentage range of your initial forecast. And that range, it's not just some random number somebody pulled out of a hat. It actually changes based on where your organization is on its FinOps journey, that whole maturity model we talked about earlier.
So the more experience you have, the tighter you can control those variations. Like you get better at hitting the target over time.
You got it. Think of it this way. At the crawl stage, when you're just starting out, a variance of, say, up to 20% might be totally acceptable. And that makes sense, right? You're still figuring things out, gathering data, learning how your cloud consumption works. But as you progress, as you hit that run stage, well, that acceptable variance, it gets smaller, down to like 12%. Because now you've got more data at your fingertips, a deeper understanding of your systems, and your processes have become more refined, which means your forecasts can be more accurate.
I like how this all ties back to that maturity model. It's like leveling up in a video game. You gain experience, unlock new abilities, and can handle tougher challenges.
And just like in those games, communication is key. Remember those stakeholder notifications we talked about earlier? Super important. They keep everyone in the loop on how the forecast is actually matching up with real spending. No surprises.
So no more hiding those overspending alerts in the back of the inbox, hoping nobody notices.
Definitely not. Transparency is key. It's about making sure everyone has the information they need to make smart decisions, whether it's about adjusting the budget, optimizing those resources, or even taking a second look at the product roadmap.
It's about creating that shared understanding, right? Empowering everyone to be responsible for that cloud budget.
You got it. Now let's bring it back to our source material for a minute. Remember how it talked about forecast data flowing into that budgeting capability? It's no coincidence. These two things, they're connected, intertwined even, but they're not exactly the same thing.
So if forecasting is like setting the stage, budgeting is like actually bringing in the actors, the props, the lighting, everything that brings the play to life.
Now, that's a great way to picture it. Forecasting sets those initial expectations, while budgeting is about strategically allocating the resources to make those expectations a reality. They work hand in hand to make sure your cloud initiatives actually align with those big picture financial goals.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens if they're out of sync? Like, what if you've got this really ambitious forecast, but then a much more, shall we say, conservative budget? How do you reconcile those two things?
That's when we got to put on our detective hats and do a little digging. See, when the forecast and the budget are telling two different stories, it's often a symptom of something bigger going on behind the scenes. It might mean you need to take another look at your product roadmap, revisit those pricing strategies, or even rethink your overall cloud approach.
It's like realizing your movie set needs a complete redesign halfway through filming. Time to pause, reassess, and make sure everyone's on the same page before you keep going.
Precisely. It's about addressing the root of the issue, not just slapping a Band-Aid on it. Those financial signals, they're there to guide you, to spark those bigger conversations about strategy and direction.
It's like realizing your movie set needs a complete redesign halfway through filming. It's a cue to pause, reassess, and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. Instead of just slapping on a Band-Aid solution, we need to address the root cause of the misalignment. It's about using those financial signals to drive more strategic conversations.
So it's not just about crunching numbers and hoping for the best. It's about using those numbers to make informed, strategic decisions that ripple throughout the entire organization.
You've got it. And that's the beauty of FinOps. It's about aligning finance with technology and business goals, breaking down those silos, and fostering a culture of shared responsibility when it comes to the cloud.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I used to think of forecasting as this mystical art shrouded in spreadsheets, but it's really about empowering teams to make smarter, more sustainable decisions.
I couldn't agree more. It's about moving from a reactive approach to a proactive one, where you're anticipating needs, optimizing resources, and driving financial success in the cloud.
So for anyone feeling overwhelmed by the world of cloud costs, remember this. Accurate forecasting isn't about predicting the future with perfect precision. It's about arming yourself with the insights and tools to navigate that future with confidence.
Well said. It's about making informed decisions today to shape a more financially sound and sustainable tomorrow.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of forecasting in FinOps. We've unpacked the why, the how, and the who behind this essential practice, highlighting its impact on everything from product development to sustainability.
And let's not forget that crucial takeaway. Success in forecasting isn't about eliminating variance altogether. It's about understanding those variances, managing them within an acceptable threshold, and continuously learning and adapting along the way.
Absolutely. Now, here's a final thought to ponder as you embark on your own FinOps adventures. We've explored the technical aspects of forecasting, but what about the human side of the equation? How can organizations cultivate a culture where everyone feels empowered to contribute to accurate forecasting and responsible cloud spending? That's something to mull over until our next deep dive.